Welcome to our New Horizons small group for this, the third Sunday of June. We have started a new quarter. We're using the Explore the Bible curriculum books of Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. We're on chapter or session number 3. It's entitled Remembering God's Works, and we're in Joshua chapter 3 and Joshua chapter 4. So, Explore the Bible curriculum, Joshua, Judges, Ruth. Session 3, Remembering God's Works, Joshua chapters 3 and 4. So as we're starting, let's just kind of remember what the book of Joshua is and what we've done so far. The book of Joshua is a hinge book. It's like a door or a bridge that goes from one thought to another thought. The hinge here is between the first 5 books of the Bible that Moses wrote, talking about the creation all the way up through the Israelites leaving Egypt and getting to the promised land. And then after Joshua, we get into the Judges and the monarchy period. So the book of Joshua is kind of a connector between the two. Book of Joshua begins with the conquest of Canaan, ends with the distribution of the land among the 12 tribes, and then goes into the period of the Judges, which we're going to find here end of July, 1st of August, when we get into the Judges, that the people tended to forget what God had done for them. And they fell into a cycle of rebellion and punishment and repentance and rebellion, and it just kept going. The book of Judges is basically a book of cycles. And then in the books of Samuel and the Kings and the Chronicles, it goes on to talk about the monarchy period of the Old Testament. But today, the title is Remembering God's Works. How many of you have noticed, as you drive along the road, little memorials on the side of the road? Sometimes they're crosses, sometimes there's more than a cross out there. When we come out of our subdivision, right there at the intersection, there is a cross and some pictures and some other things for a young lady who evidently was killed in an accident or something. I've never paid all that much attention to it. I've just noticed it's being there. But I've noticed there's lots of them as you drive along the road. Remembrances of somebody who died. But memorials are not always remembrances of somebody who has passed. Sometimes memorials are intended to remember good things in life, or they're to remember things in our history that are important. So here's your thought for today. Can you think of some memorials in the U.S. that are there to help us remember our history or the good things in our nation?
World War I memorial right here in town.
A World War I memorial?
Yep. Mount Rushmore.
Mount Rushmore?
Crazy Horse.
Crazy Horse?
Yeah. I love Crazy Horse. The Liberty Bell.
Liberty Bell?
There's 9/11.
The 9/11?
Yeah.
Gateway Arch?
Oh, yeah.
Statue of Liberty?
Amen. Yeah, the flag.
The flag? Okay.
And then all the memorials in Washington, D.C.
Well, all the memorials in D.C. I listed the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Memorial. We have lots of memorials around, the purpose of which is to help us to remember our history and to help us to remember the good things that have happened to our nation. They also help us to remember the good things that have happened to us. As we go into chapter 3 of of Joshua, we're going to see the Israelites setting up a memorial. So what's happened so far? In chapter 1 of Joshua, God has come to Joshua and said, okay, Joshua, it's time to quit grieving over Moses. It's time to pack up, cross the Jordan River, and take the land that I have promised you. So Joshua gives orders to all of the different administrative heads of the tribes, and they begin to pack up, pull up their tents, get ready to cross the Jordan River. Chapter 2, if you remember last week, we took a little bit of an interlude because we looked at the story of the spies that went into Jericho and the story of Rahab. Chapter 3, 4, and 5 of Joshua, we come back to the Israelites now crossing the Jordan River. Dean again handed out to you a handout this morning. One side is kind of a summary of the life of Joshua. Joshua doesn't just appear in the book that has his name on it. He appears in several other books in the Bible as well. And on the reverse side of it, there's a little article that talks about memorial stones or memorial piles that were used in ancient times as things to remember history or events. So we're going to get ready this morning to cross the Jordan River. Oh, the first thing we need to think about is the Jordan River. So those of you that still have your maps of the conquest, pull those out. If you don't have the maps, look in the back cover of your book. There's a map there. Find the Jordan River. It's kind of in the center of the map. And then follow the Jordan River north, and you'll see Mount Hermon towards the very top of your map. The Jordan River headwater is in Mount Hermon to the north of the Promised Land, and it empties into the Dead Sea at the far south. And you'll see where Jericho is. And normally, the Jordan River is easy to cross. It's a relatively shallow river, and it's not that far across. But in flood stage, in the spring and harvest period, when all the snow has melted off of Mount Hermon, and all the rains have come for the crops, it floods. And it gets very deep, and it gets very wide. It becomes much, much more difficult to cross. And this is the time frame that we're talking about. Most biblical commentaries put the crossing of the Jordan River in March, April, which would be at the end of the spring rains, after the snow has melted, and when the river is flowing at flood stage. And this is where the Israelites are going to cross. So we're starting in Joshua chapter 3, beginning at verse 14 and going through 17. Joshua chapter 3, beginning at 14 and going to the end of the chapter. Shirley, would you read those?
So when the people set out from their tents to pass over the Jordan, with the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant before the people, and as soon as those bearing the Ark had come as far as the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the Ark were dipped in the brink of the water, now the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of harvest. The waters coming down from above stood and rose up in a heap very far away, and at the city that is beside Zarephath, and those flowing down toward the sea of the Arabian. salt city, were completely cut off, and the people passed over opposite Jericho. Now the priests bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firmly on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel was passing over on dry ground until all the nations finished passing over the Jordan.
Okay. In the Holman, verse 14 says, when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan. Remember back in chapter 1, Joshua gave orders to gave orders to gather up everything, pull up your tents, pack, get all your food supplies, get ready to move. They have broken camp. The priest carried the Ark of the Covenant ahead of the people. The Ark of the Covenant carried the Ten Commandments, a jar of manna, and the rod of Aaron that budded back in Egypt. It was a remembrance of God's provision and his leadership as they wandered the desert for 40 years, and now the ark is going to lead them into the promised land. There are some similarities between the crossing of the Jordan and the crossing of the Red Sea. What are they?
Well, they parted the waters and
Well,
then they closed them back up.
one they parted the waters, and one they closed back up. You go back and read the Red Sea event. They talk about how high the waters piled up above. So they split the water. What else similarities do you see? All the Israelites crossed on dry land. I think it's important to note that it's dry land. It wasn't a mud flat. It was dry. So not only did the waters back up, it dried it out so that it was easy for them to walk across. Can you imagine trying to move all your possessions through a pile of mud? In both cases, God dried it out so that you were able to move across on dry land. Verse 15, now the Jordan overflows its banks throughout the harvest season. But as soon as the priests carrying the ark reached the Jordan, their feet touched the edge of the water at its edge, and the water flowing downstream stood still, rising up in a mass that extended as far as Adam, a city near Zarethan. Now, the city of Adam does not appear on your map. Sorry, but find Jericho on your map. The city of Adam is about 10 or 15 miles to the north of Jericho. So just kind of eyeball it as to where it's just a little bit to the north of Jericho. And notice from there to the Dead Sea, there's still quite a bit of river going on. But God stopped the river. In fact, the word that is used here when they talk about cutting off the river is the same covenant word that refers to sacrifices, to the cutting up of animals for a sacrifice. So it's showing that this was God's act. Just like in the crossing of the Red Sea, people come up with all kinds of reasons as to why the Red Sea stopped. They just don't accept that, it was a miracle. Well, we get to the crossing of the Jordan, it's the same thing. There's a natural explanation for it, right? No.
That's what they always say.
There's no natural explanation for stopping it and then also drying out all the land below it so that people could cross. As soon as the priest's feet touched the water, not before, not after, but right when it happened, the water flowing downstream was cut off, and the people crossed opposite the Jordan. Now think about it again for a minute. If they crossed in a mud flat, they would get bogged down, and the soldiers from Jericho would have been fairly easy to defeat them. But Jericho and the residents, if you remember back in chapter 2, are all afraid of the Israelites to begin with because of what happened at the Red Sea. And now they're crossing the Jordan, and oh my goodness, the same thing is happening. Doesn't give you a real safe feeling if you're inside those walls. The priest carrying the Ark of the Lord's covenant stood firmly on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel crossed on dry land until the entire nation had finished crossing. So picture the priests carrying the ark on poles in the middle of the river, and all of Israel crossing on either side of them. It must have took a while, because by this time, Israel's not a small nation. It's a lot of people that's got to cross the river. But the priest stood in the middle of the river with the Ark of the Covenant until everybody crossed. It was backed up, and it stayed backed up until God decided it was time to let it loose. So what happened after they crossed the river? Here's the memorial. Joshua chapter 4, verses 1 to 7. Paul, would you read those, please? 1 to 7.
After the entire nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord spoke to Joshua, choose 12 men from the people, one man from each tribe, and command them, take 12 stones from this place in the middle of the Jordan, where the priests are now standing, carrying them with you, and set them down at the place where you spend the night. So Joshua summoned the 12 men he had selected from the Israelites. One man from each tribe said to them, go to the ark of the Lord your God in the middle of the Jordan. Each one of you lift a stone onto your shoulder, one for each of the Israelite tribes. So this will be the sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you what these stones mean to you, you should tell them, the water of the Jordan was cut off in front of the ark of the Lord of the covenant. When it crossed the Jordan water was cut off. Therefore, these stones will always be a memorial for the Israelites.
Okay. Verse 1 says, after the entire nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord spoke to Joshua. The crossing of the Red Sea is kind of a backward look and a forward look. It's a backward look because some of the people in the nation of Israel were children when they left Egypt, and they would have remembered God's action at the Red Sea. But it's also a forward look because God has promised them the land of Canaan, and now they are actually moving into the land of Canaan. Just like God did for Moses, God also spoke to Joshua and exalted him as the leader of the nation of Israel. And here in verse 2, they're going to put up a monument that would remind them of what has happened as they cross the Jordan River. Verse 2 says, choose 12 men from the people, one for each tribe, and command them, take 12 stones from this place in the middle of the Jordan where the priest's feet are standing, carry them with you, and set them down at the place where you spent the night. Now we talk a lot about the number 7 in the Bible being a number of completion. But the number 12, I don't have 12 fingers, sorry, 10, 2. The number 12 has a lot of significance too. Think about where the number 12 appears in the Old and the New Testament.
12 disciples.
12 disciples, 12 tribes of Israel, In Revelation, a factor of 12, 144,000, appears as the witnesses in Revelation. 12 stones. 12 has some significance in biblical history. But I think what's really interesting about this is notice the size of the stone. Take a stone big enough that you carry it on your shoulder. So you're not just taking something you can carry in one hand. You're carrying a stone big enough that you put it up on your shoulder to carry it across. The emphasis is not so much on the number as it was remembering what God has done in the past and what God is going to do in the future. So Joshua summoned the 12 men selected from the Israelites, one man from each tribe, and said to them, "Go across to the ark of the Lord your God in the middle of the Jordan. Each of you lift a stone on his shoulder, one for each of the Israelite tribes, so that this will be a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' you should tell them, 'The waters of the Jordan were cut off in front of the ark of the Lord's covenant. When it crossed the Jordan's waters were cut off. Therefore, these stones will always be a memorial for the Israelites.'"
Are those stones still there?
At the time this was written, the answer is yes. I don't know if they're still there today or not. Lots have changed in the time frame. But again, notice they'd already identified the 12 men, one from each tribe. Also kind of reminds me of the 12 spies that went in, except this time there's no disagreement about going into the land. They're all going in. But they want to remember it. So, depending on your commentary, there's some disagreement. Did these 12 guys, did all of the nation get across, and then the 12 guys that are the representatives go back and get the stone? Or did they pick it up on the way out? Doesn't tell us. It doesn't matter to the story. It matters to the fact that they're setting up a memorial. Whether they picked it up on the way or they went back to get it. It's one of these cases where the Hebrew language is kind of ambivalent as to what happened. Did they pick it up on the way or did they go back and get it? The point here, though, is they went back and got 12 big stones to set up as something to remember what happened. When they talk about it being a sign, think back to the 12 plagues of Egypt. Those were all signs of God's power to pull his people out. Last week, Rahab asked for a sign that her family would be protected. It's the same word. It's a word that has connection with covenant language, with the idea that there's a contract in force here. So these 12 stones are a sign or an indication that there is a covenant now between the people of Israel and God as they move into the promised land. Verses 8 and 9. Dean, would you read those?
So the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord had told Joshua, and they carried them over with them to their camp, where they put them down. Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan as the spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant had stood, and they are there to this day.
Okay. So the 12 men that Joshua had selected pick up the huge stones, carry them to where they were going to camp, and they set up a pillar or monument. Now, it doesn't tell us right here where that was. But again, I honestly don't remember if it's on your map or not. But the first place they camped was a place called Gilgal.
Yes, there.
Gilgal. Is it on the map?
Right above Jericho.
Okay, right above Jericho. That's the first place the Israelites camped when they got into the Promised Land. And that's important for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's the first place they occupied in Canaan. Number two, it's important because this was the first place that the Israelites ate from the fruit of the land of Canaan. So, big deal. Why is that important? Anybody got an idea? God gave it to them. What else did he give them in the wandering? The manna. Ate no more manna. This is God no longer provides manna because you're now in the promised land. You have the fruit of the land I promised you to feed you. And
that was a feast.
It's what?
I bet that was a good feast.
Yeah. More than just manna. So, the third thing's important about it, not in chapter 4, but in chapter 5, which is not part of the lesson, but bring it in. Chapter 5, it's also the place where the Israelites renew their covenant. And they renewed the covenant in two ways. First, they ensured that every male of the tribes of Israel were circumcised. Because if you remember back with Abraham, circumcision was a sign of the covenant, and evidently that practice had fallen away. But now they are renewing the covenant, so every male was circumcised. And secondly, it was the first time that they celebrated the Passover in the Promised Land. So it's a renewal of the covenant. God has said it's going to be our land, and we're now in our land.
So, didn't it say somewhere in here where, so now they're over here and they're not gonna have any more manna, but didn't it say in here something about they put some manna inside the ark?
Yeah, they took, in the ark was a jar of some of the manna.
Oh, jar, that was it.
Yeah. Part of what was in the ark, along with the staff and the Ten Commandment tablets, is a jar with manna to remember God's provision in the wilderness.
Got it.
So, Gilgal is important. It will become, if you remember some of our studies later in the Old Testament, the town of Gilgal comes up numerous times. It's an important site in the history of Israel. Again, there are times in the Hebrew language when it's not clear what's happening. Because the Hebrew language didn't know this. Those of you that may be Hebrew scholars, evidently Hebrew verbs do not have tenses. So trying to decide whether it means now, before, or in the future, sometimes it's hard to figure it out. Because when you read those last couple of verses, some commentaries say that it could read that not only did they establish a memorial stone on the land at Gilgal, they also did it in the middle of the Jordan River. That's what I would call alternative history. Me talking. Most commentaries say it's a matter of how the tenses work in the Hebrew. They're really talking about the memorial that's on land. Take your pick. Either, depending on which commentary you read, either one will fit the language. The question you had, Paul, if it's still there, I'm going to guess no, because it's been several hundred years and it's probably not there, but I don't know that. I think what's important about the memorial stone is that it, like the Passover, is meant to remember something that only God could do. Remember, the Passover commemorates the death angel passing over Egypt and killing all the firstborns except for the Israelites in their houses with the blood on the lintel. Only God could do that. Only God could open the Red Sea. Only God could open the Jordan River. The memorial stones recognize the fact that this is in fact a miracle that only God could do. Chapter 5 then ends. They have done the Passover, they've renewed the covenant, and now we're getting ready to attack Jericho. And at the end of chapter 5, Joshua has an encounter with a very significant being. In chapter 5, that being is called the commander of the army of the Lord. Those of you that were here earlier, I think it was end of last year, when we talked about where Jesus appears in the Old Testament, some commentaries see the commander of the army of the Lord as the pre-incarnate Christ appearing to Joshua saying, it's not your strength, it's God's strength that's going to take Jericho. That's a side note. Those of you that were here in the fall, remember that discussion. If you didn't, go check the videos. We went in detail over how they come up with that. But the point is, Joshua is reminded that yes, you are the leader of Israel. Yes, you are the military commander. Yes, you are the one responsible for carrying out God's command. But remember, it's not your power that gets it done. It's God's power. And then they're told how to take Jericho, which was a head scratcher, because it's not the way you normally did things. Next week, come back and see how they take Jericho. Questions? Bev?
This is not a question. I gotta go read. There's donuts up here. Anybody want them? You wanna take the container, take it home, bring it back empty next week.
Okay.
I don't need the donuts.
Or fill it up and bring it back.
Huh?
Or fill it up and bring it back.
Well, yeah, fill it up and bring it back to something else. That's even better.
Questions, comments, anything you want to add?
Sorry, James.
Well, I'm glad that, or hopefully he sent younger men than the people in this class to pick those stones up, because it wasn't very big, I had to carry them on my shoulder.
Well, you got to realize that probably most of these people, remember the older generation died in the wilderness. So the ones that are left are kids that have gone older. It's been 40 years. So they're probably definitely younger than us.
That's right.
Because I couldn't have picked up that big a stone.
I'd have carried pebbles on my shoulders.
Yeah, and then it says Joshua took 12 of them and by himself.
Yeah, he stacked them up.
He stacked them up.
Stacked them up. Okay. No other questions or comments? Let's close with prayer then, and we'll be finished. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this lesson this morning and for this reminder that we live life not in our own power, but in yours. Thank you that we have memorial stones in our life that helps us to remember the things that you have done. May we go through life depending on you. Be with us as we go into the next service. Be with Patrick as he brings your word from the book of John. Keep us safe. Bring us back next Sunday as we look at the Battle of Jericho. We ask it in your name. Amen.